The meeting that almost didn't happen. The rain in San Francisco was steady that morning, soft enough to blur the skyline but heavy enough to keep most people indoors. Inside the glass-walled lobby of a downtown hotel, a group of executives from around the world gathered for a quiet, private conference. It was not the type of event with cameras and red carpets. It was meant for discussion, for real talk about where technology was going, and about how the people who shaped it could still remember the people it served. Sundar sat by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. His eyes were calm, but anyone looking closely could see the faint weight in them, the kind that comes from years of navigating decisions that affect millions. His assistant had told him Shantanu Narayen would be joining the session in the afternoon. Sundar wasn't sure what to expect. They knew each other's names and had been in the same rooms before, but they had never really sat down together, just the two of them. In another part of the city, Shantanu was stuck in traffic. His driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror, reading the tension on his face. Shantanu had been up all night finalizing a deal that would protect hundreds of jobs in India. He wasn't thinking about speeches or press photos. He was thinking about the engineers whose families depended on him. As the minutes passed, he almost told the driver to turn around. There were too many emails waiting, too many fires to put out, but something in him said he needed to go. By the time he arrived, the lobby was almost empty. He spotted Sundar sitting alone, looking out at the rain. For a moment, he thought about walking straight to the elevator. After all, they were both busy men. But he walked over instead. "Mind if I sit?" Shantanu asked. Sundar looked up, a faint smile breaking across his face. "Please." They spoke quietly at first, about the rain, about the jet lag, about how the city seemed smaller every time they visited. But then the conversation began to turn. Shantanu mentioned the deal he had just closed, the one that would keep hundreds employed. Sundar nodded slowly and said, "Sometimes people forget that our job is not just about building products, it's about protecting the hands that build them." That line stayed in the air between them, heavy but warm. Then Sundar shared something he rarely spoke about in public, a story from years ago when a factory in a small town supplying parts for Google's devices had been at risk of closing. He remembered visiting the town, walking into the cafeteria and seeing workers eat in silence, afraid to look up because they knew the end might be near. "We found a way to keep it open," he said softly. "But it taught me something. Numbers on a spreadsheet never show the fear in someone's eyes." Shantanu's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "I've seen that fear," he said. "And I've learned that if we have the power to change it, even for a few, we have no excuse not to." It was strange. Two leaders of massive companies sitting in a quiet lobby, talking not about market share or acquisitions, but about the simplest, most human truths. Then came the moment neither expected. A young hotel staff member approached, hesitating. She held a tablet with a cracked screen. "I'm sorry," she said. "I know you're busy, but my brother is in India studying computer science. He talks about you both all the time. He doesn't believe kindness still exists in tech. Would you tell me something I can send him?" Shantanu and Sundar exchanged a glance. They didn't need to plan their answer. "Tell him," Sundar said, "that kindness isn't a strategy. It's a choice you make before you ever walk into the room." Shantanu added, "And tell him that if he chooses it enough times, it will lead him further than fear ever could." The staff member smiled, almost in disbelief, and thanked them before hurrying away. For a long moment, they just sat there, listening to the rain. Neither spoke, but something had shifted. They were no longer just two CEOs meeting in passing. They were two men who understood the quiet weight of doing the right thing when no one was watching. Neither of them knew yet that before the day was over, they would be tested on those very words, and that the world would be watching after all. The test in the rain. The phone on the low table between them started to buzz. then another, then a third. The quiet lobby suddenly felt like a drum. Right away, the air changed, like a storm turning a corner. Sundar looked at Shantanu, then at the screen. Both had the same alert from different teams. A community lab across town had been locked out of its software licenses that morning because of a billing change. Students were waiting at the doors in wet hoodies, and a local news crew had already started filming. The headline on the screen used the same word the hotel staff member had said earlier. It said, "Does kindness still exist in tech?" Sundar exhaled slowly. His tea had gone cold, but his eyes were awake now. "We can fix a billing issue," he said, but the words sounded smaller than the problem, because it was not only about a payment. It was about how 1,000 small systems, each made to be efficient and safe, could forget the face on the other side of the screen. Their handlers hurried in from 2 directions, telling them the panel would start in 20 minutes, reminding them of press questions and prepared talking points. They were told this wasn't their product, not their team, not their problem to step into. Then, as if the morning wanted to prove a point, the hotel staff member from earlier stepped out of the elevator with red eyes. She tried to speak, then held up her cracked tablet. On the screen was a message from her brother. He had gone to the community lab at dawn to help set up a student hack day. The doors were open, but the computers were locked by a pop-up that said "Use suspended." Shantanu stood. "How far is it?" 20 minutes, she said. "Maybe more with the rain." He looked at Sundar. There was a short silence where both of them measured the cost of a choice. There would be calls, there would be questions. There would be people who would say they had left a stage for a small problem in a small building on a wet morning. But there would also be a room full of students losing a day they had waited months for. "Let's go," Sundar said. They moved toward the door. Security tried to stop them, then adjusted, then fell into step with quiet surprise. The handlers whispered into headsets. The drivers ran for the cars. And then an unexpected thing happened that made the decision feel even more right. The fire doors at the end of the lobby swung open, and an elderly janitor came in pushing a yellow bucket. He slipped on the wet mat and the bucket tipped. Water spilled across the tiles. The man tried to steady himself and failed, catching the edge of the bucket and sinking to one knee. Before anyone else moved, Shantanu stepped to him and put out a hand. "You okay?" The janitor nodded, embarrassed, saying he was fine, saying he was sorry for the mess, saying it was his fault for moving too fast. His hands shook as he set the bucket upright. Sundar grabbed a stack of towels from the front desk and knelt down, pressing them to the water to stop it from spreading. For a moment, the 2 men who often walked on stages without touching a thing were on their knees on the hotel floor, holding white towels to wet tile, looking up at an older man who kept apologizing. "Please don't be sorry," Sundar said softly. "Rain comes when it wants." The janitor looked at them like he was not sure he was seeing real life. His eyes were tired, but they softened in a way that made the morning feel bigger than a conference. He said thank you, and Shantanu touched his shoulder before they hurried out into the rain. The ride across town felt longer than it was. The streets flashed with red lights and wet reflections. Inside the car, 2 phones kept ringing. Legal wanted to remind them about the quiet period before earnings. Comms wanted to remind them that any statement could be read as a policy shift. Finance wanted to remind them that education pricing had to be uniform and automated. Everything was correct on paper. None of it helped a room full of kids right now. "We do not need to make a statement," Shantanu said. "We need to make a call." He dialed a senior product lead he trusted. He spoke with care, no drama, no big words, just the specific steps needed. A manual override for the lab's account today. A blanket grace period for all registered community labs for 90 days, while the pricing change rolled out. Escalation rules so that any education lockout triggered a person-to-person check before a shutdown. The lead on the other end went quiet, then said they would make it happen. Sundar was texting too. He wrote to his team with short lines, each one a task. Confirm the lab ID, check the last invoice, see if the flags came from a fraud sweep, add human verification to the rule set. He added one more line, the most important: stay kind, call, do not email, explain, do not warn. As the car stopped near the lab, a small crowd huddled under umbrellas. A TV van was parked at an angle. A police officer waved them through the tape after a quick talk with security. The lab itself looked tired but loved, with posters of old coding nights on the glass and faded stickers on the door. You could hear a kind of quiet inside that sounded like hope being held back. They walked in together. On the left, a row of computers showed the same lockout screen. In the back, a girl with a braided ponytail held a box of cables and tried not to cry. The staff member from the hotel pointed at her. "That's my brother's friend," she whispered. A man in a gray sweater came forward, trying to be calm. "We were told the account flagged for risk and the grace period ended at midnight," he said. "We can pay. We were trying to fix it. We sent emails. We did not know it would happen today." He stopped when he recognized the faces in front of him. He turned to the students, unsure of what to say. Sundar lifted a hand. "You do not need to explain," he said. "Let us fix it." They moved past the cameras and into the office. Shantanu asked for a spare laptop. The manager offered his. They opened the admin panel, and within moments, the product lead texted back a code to reauthorize the account. Shantanu typed carefully, checked twice, and hit enter. In the main room, the lockout screens blinked, then cleared. A low ripple moved through the crowd, a sound you hear at hospitals when pain finally lifts. Not loud, just a shared breath. But the test was not over. A reporter in a hooded jacket stepped forward. "Is this a publicity move?" she asked. "Or will this become policy? Are you doing this because our cameras are here?" The room went still. The students watched. The staff member watched. The janitor from the hotel was not here, but if he had been, his face would have looked the same as theirs, waiting to see if words matched actions. Sundar looked at Shantanu, then at the reporter. "We came because a person asked for help," he said. "We stayed because we learned the system forgot to ask a human before it shut a door. We are changing that system, not for a headline, for the next time, and the time after." Shantanu nodded. "Hold us to it," he said. "And if we slow down, ask us again." The reporter lowered her mic a little. The cameraman shifted. The tension in the room did not break. It changed shape. It became a kind of careful trust that only appears when people see someone hold the weight they are supposed to hold. An unexpected voice rose from the back. It was the girl with the braided ponytail. "My brother is in India," she said softly. "He thinks tech leaders do not listen. He thinks he is too small to matter. Can I record a message for him now?" "Yes," Shantanu said. She held up her phone with shaking hands. Sundar stood beside her with a gentle smile, and Shantanu took a small step back so her face could fill the screen. She hit record. "Hi," she said. "They came. They did not send someone. They came in the rain. They fixed it, and they changed the rules. Your poster people are real." She stopped recording. Her shoulders relaxed for the first time that morning. A few students clapped, but it was soft, like a promise not to turn this into a show. In the corner of the office, a printer clicked to life and pushed out a single page. Someone had sent over a one-line approval from legal that said the 90-day grace for community labs could be formalized as a pilot. It was not permanent yet, but it was real. A start. They stepped back into the main room. The screens were live now. Code editors glowed. One boy tested a simple app that helped his mother track her blood sugar. Another girl opened a project that translated flood warnings into 3 local languages. The work looked small to a market analyst and huge to the lives near it. Outside, the rain eased into mist. The TV van drove away without sirens. The officer took down the tape. Drivers texted to ask if they were still needed. Handlers asked for updated schedules, and the panel coordinator said they could still make it if they left now. On the way out, a boy near the door lifted his hand. "Sir," he said. "Ma'am." His voice shook. "Thank you for not making us feel like a line item." "You are never a line item," Sundar said. "You are the reason the line exists." Back in the car, they sat in a quiet that felt different from the lobby quiet. It was not heavy. It was full. They watched the lab shrink in the mirror. The staff member from the hotel hugged her brother's friend on the sidewalk. The phones were still buzzing, but now the messages were different. One product lead wrote that they had pushed the human check rule to all education accounts. Another wrote that they were forming a small team to review automated lockouts by hand each morning. A third wrote a simple line: "Kindness implemented." Shantanu smiled at that and shook his head. "It should not take a rainy morning to do what is right," he said. "Maybe it takes one," Sundar replied, "to remind us why we built any of this." They were halfway back to the hotel when the next test arrived. A message popped up from a partner factory overseas. An algorithm used by a logistics vendor had flagged their shipments as high risk and held them at port. If the hold stayed in place, the factory would go dark in 3 days. 600 workers might be sent home without pay. The message ended with a line that did not sound like a business note. It sounded like a question written with tired hands. "Does anyone see us?" The car rolled through a yellow light and stopped at a red. The city outside the window looked washed clean. Inside the car, the choices lined up again: panel or port, schedule or people. "We cannot fix every system today," Shantanu said, eyes on the message. "No," Sundar answered, "but the people at the end of this one need us now." He called the logistics vendor's CEO directly. There was no script, no pressure, just a calm man explaining what was at stake and asking for a human to sit with the data. The vendor promised a review within the hour. Then he called the partner factory manager and asked for details he could pass along. Names, shifts. The cost of a pause measured not in currency but in school fees and rent. As the light turned green, the phones quieted for a moment, as if the city itself wanted to give them space to decide who they would be for the rest of the day. They looked at each other, and both nodded without words. They would go back to the hotel, they would make the panel, they would answer questions. But their real work had already declared itself. The rest of the day would be a weaving of 2 threads, one public and one private, both held with the same hand. When they reached the hotel, the same janitor was drying the mat with a small fan. He saw them and lifted his hand in a shy wave. The floor was clean now. The bucket was full again. The mess had been dealt with, but the memory of 2 men kneeling in the lobby remained like a soft light. "Thank you for earlier," the janitor said. "Thank you for keeping us from slipping," Shantanu replied. They took the elevator up. The doors closed. The quiet pressed in. Their reflections looked back at them in the silver panel. 2 figures who had spent the morning choosing. When the doors opened again, a stage manager was waiting with a clipboard and a list of questions that felt suddenly small beside the list in their heads. They stepped toward the stage together, prepared to talk about innovation and market trends. What the audience did not know yet was that the trend they were about to set had nothing to do with features or charts. It had to do with a new morning rule that would start in 2 companies and spread wider if enough people decided to carry it. No education account would be locked without a person looking first. No supplier would be frozen without a voice in the room to say the names behind the numbers. And still, the day had one more turn waiting, a twist that would ask them to hold the line they had drawn in the rain and carry it into a room full of lights. The room full of lights. The stage was bright. Brighter than either of them preferred, the kind of light that makes you feel like you're under a microscope. The audience was a mix of journalists, entrepreneurs, and students who had won contest tickets. The host smiled wide for the cameras, his voice bouncing off the walls as he introduced Sundar and Shantanu. Applause rose, polite but eager. They walked out side by side as they had done walking into the lab hours earlier. They took their seats, each with a glass of water in front of them. From the outside, it looked like a standard tech panel. From the inside, both men knew they were still carrying the weight of the morning. The first questions were softballs. Innovation pipelines, emerging markets, the role of AI in the next decade. They answered with care, neither revealing the morning's events yet. They spoke about trust and long-term vision, but their words had an undercurrent, a subtle shift in tone that the sharpest listeners could feel. Then a student in the audience raised her hand. She wore a simple blue sweater and had a notebook in her lap. Her voice trembled slightly. "You both talk about building for billions," she said, "but what happens when your systems hurt the people with the least power to speak up? What happens when kindness costs money?" The room went quiet. Cameras turned toward her. The host looked at the clock, clearly unsure whether to let this line of questioning continue. Sundar leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on the young woman. "What's your name?" he asked. "Priya," she said. "Priya," he said. "This morning we had that exact question in front of us. We could have left it to a policy. We could have left it to a spreadsheet. But we didn't. We left the building instead." Shantanu glanced at him and then at the audience. "We went to a community lab where students were locked out of their computers," he said. "It wasn't a big market loss. It wasn't a high-value customer account. It was kids and their work. We fixed it. We changed a rule so it won't happen the same way again." There was a murmur in the room. Phones came out. Someone was already tweeting. The host leaned forward, sensing the shift. "Are you saying you altered your company's process this morning?" "Yes," Sundar said simply. "Because the right thing to do is rarely the easy thing. And if we can't make the hard call for the smallest group, then we don't deserve the trust of the largest." Priya nodded slowly, her pen still. "Thank you," she said, and sat down. But the questions that followed were sharper now. A journalist in the second row asked about the partner factory's shipment hold, clearly having picked up whispers from somewhere. "You intervened there too?" he asked. Shantanu did not dodge it. "We are in the middle of that now," he said. "We don't yet know the outcome. But we know this. It's not just about shipping containers. It's about 600 workers whose lives could be turned upside down. If that makes it our problem, then yes, it is ours." Another reporter jumped in. "But what about fairness? If you step in for some, aren't you showing favoritism?" Sundar met the question with calm. "There's a difference between favoritism and responsibility," he said. "Favoritism is about who you like. Responsibility is about who you owe. When your systems affect lives, you owe those lives your attention." The room shifted again. It wasn't applause yet, but the air was heavier, the way it gets when people realize the conversation isn't just about business anymore. And then came the moment they didn't see coming. The side door of the auditorium opened quietly. In walked the hotel staff member from earlier, still in her uniform, holding a phone. She stood near the aisle until the host noticed her and waved her forward. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said softly into the mic, "but my brother in India just sent me a message. The video from this morning reached his entire class. They stopped their lecture to watch it. And he asked me to read something to you." She unfolded a piece of paper. Her hands shook just slightly. He wrote, "I did not think the people at the top would care about people like us. Now I know it can happen. If you see Sundar sir and Shantanu sir again, tell them I will remember this day when I have to choose what kind of engineer I will be." For a second, no one moved. Even the host seemed caught in the moment. Sundar's eyes dropped to the floor and Shantanu took a slow breath. "Thank you," Shantanu said, his voice quiet but steady. Tell him we will remember too. She stepped back and the host tried to move on, but something in the room had changed. You could feel the focus tighten, like the whole audience was leaning forward, not for the headlines, but for the humanity. As the panel wrapped, the applause came. Not loud, but long. It was the kind that people keep going because they don't want the moment to end. Backstage, a stagehand handed Sundar a folded note. It was from his chief of operations. It said, "Port clearance approved, shipments released, workers stay on." He showed it to Shantanu, and they shared a quiet smile. 2 tests passed in one day. But the note also carried something unspoken, that there would be more tests, and not all of them would be in rain-soaked labs or on well-lit stages. They stepped into the service corridor, avoiding the crowd. The lights here were dim, the air cooler. Their steps echoed on the concrete floor. "Do you ever think," Sundar said, "that the real work isn't in the boardroom at all?" "I know it isn't," Shantanu replied. "It's wherever the decision meets the person it touches." As they walked toward the exit, neither noticed the young intern with a press badge trailing behind, recording every word on her phone. What she captured would become something far larger than either of them imagined, a moment that would travel far beyond the conference hall, carrying their morning choices into places they would never see. And before the day ended, that recording would be tested against a challenge bigger than either of them had faced so far. The intern hesitated. "There's one more thing. The factory you helped earlier? One of the workers recorded a message for you. It's different from the others." She played it. A man's voice came through, rough and tired. "We heard you stepped in for us. We're grateful. But we don't want to be saved once. We want the system that almost ended us to change, so no one else has to wait for a miracle call. Can you promise that?" The room went silent. It wasn't a thank you. It was a challenge. "He's right," Shantanu said finally. "Fixing a moment is not enough." Sundar nodded. "Then we don't just fix days. We fix patterns." They both knew what that meant. Not more press moments, but deep, systemic changes that would take months, maybe years, and might not earn them applause. The intern put her phone away. "Do you want me to hold the story?" she asked. "No," Sundar said. "Let it run. The story will only matter if the next one matches it." As night settled outside, the city lights reflected on the conference room table. Somewhere in the distance, traffic hummed, oblivious to the conversations inside. The day had begun with rain and small acts. It was ending with a bigger horizon, one that would test whether 2 men could turn a string of choices into something lasting. Neither of them knew yet that the next test would come not from a request for help, but from an attack meant to break that very trust they were building. The attempt to break the trust. The city was quieter at night, but inside the upper floors of Sundar's hotel, the air was tense. The small conference room where they had helped the school earlier was now occupied by security staff and a couple of trusted aides from both companies. The reason was simple and sharp. Someone had leaked internal documents. On Sundar's tablet, the first headlines were already appearing. They claimed that the morning's kindness at the community lab was staged weeks in advance as a public relations event. Screenshots of supposed emails were being shared online, showing a planned intervention to make both leaders look good before quarterly earnings. The problem was that the emails were fake, but convincing. Shantanu scrolled through them slowly, jaw tight. They made it look like we picked the lab, planted the students, and even wrote the speech about kindness ahead of time. "They know what they're doing," Sundar said quietly. "Truth moves slow, lies move fast." Their aides suggested issuing an immediate public statement. Their security leads suggested tracking the source first. Their legal teams, now awake in 3 time zones, suggested saying nothing until the origin was confirmed. Sundar leaned back, rubbing his temple. "If we respond too fast, we look defensive. If we wait too long, we look guilty." Shantanu was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "We don't prove this in the news cycle. We prove it by what we do next." "Agreed," Sundar said. "But we still need a way to show this isn't true without turning it into a fight." The decision came from an unexpected corner. The young hotel staff member, the same one whose brother had sent that first message from India, had been quietly listening from the doorway. "Sir," she said timidly, "what if you let the students from the lab tell the story instead? The real one. You didn't plan that, but they saw it happen." The room went still. It was simple, almost too simple. But the best answers often were. Within an hour, several students from the lab had recorded short videos explaining exactly how the morning had unfolded. One showed the moment Sundar and Shantanu walked through the rain into the lab, surprised faces and all. Another described how the computers came back online in real time. None of it was polished. None of it looked like marketing. It was raw and a little shaky, and that was exactly why it worked. By midnight, the videos were spreading almost as fast as the fake emails. Hashtags that had been accusing them of a staged act began to split, half still suspicious, half defending them with the students' footage. But the pushback brought a new complication. The person behind the leak wasn't done. An anonymous account posted a thread claiming to have evidence that the school they had helped in Southeast Asia had also been part of a prearranged kindness tour. They even included an image of Sundar and Shantanu in the conference room, a photo clearly taken through the small window in the door. The implication was clear. Someone close by was feeding images and half-truths to the person running the smear campaign. Shantanu closed his laptop slowly. "This isn't just about discrediting us," he said. "This is meant to scare us off this path entirely." "And if we let it work," Sundar said, "we prove them right." Still, there was one thing neither of them could ignore. Someone inside the hotel had access to those moments. It wasn't enough to just defend their actions anymore. They had to find out who was trying to sabotage them. The next morning, before breakfast, they met privately in the hotel's smallest meeting room. No aides, no security, just the two of them and the knowledge that the next move had to be careful. "We can do two things at once," Sundar said. "Keep helping where we can, and quietly trace this leak back to its source." "And when we find them?" Shantanu asked. "We see if they can be turned," Sundar said. "If not, we make sure they can't harm the work." Outside the window, the fog was lifting over the city. But the day ahead promised less clarity. Because in less than 24 hours, they would be forced into a public confrontation. Not with a competitor or a journalist, but with the very person trying to tear apart the trust they had begun to build. And when that moment came, it would be live, in front of an audience that had already decided what they believed. The confrontation in the open. The invitation came in the middle of the afternoon. It looked harmless at first. An industry round table, streamed live to an audience of thousands, with leaders from across the tech world. But the last name on the speaker list made Sundar and Shantanu exchange a long, silent look. It belonged to an executive from a small but aggressive analytics company, someone neither of them had worked with directly, but who had a reputation for public ambushes. And behind that company's online footprint, buried deep, was the same anonymous account that had been spreading the fake emails and staged photo accusations. "So they want to do it on stage," Shantanu said, setting the invitation down. "Then we'll do it on stage," Sundar replied. The event was held in a hall that felt both too modern and too sharp, all glass edges and polished floors. Cameras lined the walls, the seats were packed. The moderator started with light questions about innovation, collaboration, and global markets, the kind of background noise that let everyone settle into the rhythm. But 20 minutes in, the man they had been expecting leaned into his microphone. "I'd like to address something more current," he said, looking directly at Sundar and Shantanu. "Many people have seen your recent acts of kindness. Impressive stories, almost too impressive. How do we know these weren't orchestrated media plays to polish your image?" The audience shifted. The tension was almost physical. The cameras zoomed in. Shantanu didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his hands on the table. "Are you asking if we planned for a community lab to be locked out of its systems on a rainy morning?" The man shrugged. "Stranger things have been staged in this industry." Sundar's voice was steady, almost calm. "We didn't plan for it. We didn't even know about it until a hotel staff member told us her brother was locked out. We could have stayed in the lobby. We went instead. We fixed it. That's the truth." The man smirked. "Truth is subjective when you control the narrative." This time, Shantanu glanced toward the audience. "Then let's not control it. The students from the lab posted their own videos. The principal from the school overseas posted her own statement. The workers at the factory we helped have their own messages. None of them work for us. None of them were told what to say. Go watch them. Judge for yourself." The moderator tried to move on, but the man wasn't finished. "What about the leak? The so-called fake emails? Will you admit someone inside your own circle is feeding those?" This time, Sundar didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. "Someone close enough to see moments they weren't part of has been sending pieces of those moments to you. I can't speak for why they're doing it. Maybe it's personal. Maybe it's strategic. But I can tell you this. If they hoped it would stop us, they're failing." A low murmur ran through the hall. The man looked caught off guard for the first time, as if he'd been expecting denial or deflection. "So you're saying you know who it is?" "We know enough," Shantanu said. "And when we're done here, we'll speak to them directly." The rest of the panel moved on, but the mood in the room had shifted. What could have been a moment of public damage had become a moment of defiance, not loud, but unshakable. When the session ended, Sundar and Shantanu didn't head straight for the exit. They walked to the back corner of the hall where a young man in a catering uniform was packing up trays. He froze when he saw them coming. "You've been sending the photos," Sundar said gently. It wasn't a question. The man's hands shook. "I needed the money," he admitted. "They told me it was just for an article. I didn't think it would turn into this." Shantanu studied him for a moment. "And now?" The man swallowed. "Now, I think I made a mistake." "Then fix it," Sundar said. "Tell them the truth. Not for us. For the people you've hurt by making their moments look fake." The man nodded slowly, as if a weight had just landed on his shoulders, but one he could still carry. They left the hall without cameras following. Outside, the evening was cool, the city noise soft. Neither spoke until they reached the car. "This doesn't end here," Shantanu said quietly. "No," Sundar replied. "But maybe this is the start of something harder to break than trust. Proof." And as the car pulled away, the lights of the hall faded in the mirror, replaced by the wider, darker city ahead, full of people they hadn't yet met, moments they couldn't yet predict, and choices they already knew they would have to make. Building what lasts 2 weeks later, the noise online had quieted, but the work had only deepened. The leak from the catering worker was confirmed, and true to his word, he had sent a written statement to the same outlets that had run the fake emails. His words were brief, but clear. "I took photos without permission. I sold them. The events I described as staged were real. I regret my part in misleading people." It didn't erase all suspicion. Nothing ever did. But it shifted the balance. The people who had been most vocal about the kindness brand strategy now had to face unedited testimony from someone who had tried to undermine it. Still, Sundar and Shantanu knew they couldn't spend their days chasing false stories. If they wanted kindness to survive in their work, they had to root it into the systems themselves. That's what brought them back together in a small meeting room, far from cameras, in a city that wasn't either of their headquarters. On the table between them were two documents, not press releases, but internal directives they had been drafting together for days. The first was simple but radical. Any automated process in their companies that impacted access to education, health, or income would require human review before action was taken. No exceptions. No silent lockouts. The second was more personal. A joint fund, contributed to equally by both of them, dedicated to small, urgent interventions. The kind where bureaucracy usually killed the solution before it could happen. The fund would have no name, no logo, no public-facing website. The only rule was speed and impact. As they reviewed the language, they didn't speak much. Every so often, one of them would make a small note in the margin. A date for review, a clause to prevent abuse. When they finished, they signed without ceremony. "It's not perfect," Shantanu said. "Neither is a seatbelt," Sundar replied. "But it saves lives." The first test of the directives came faster than expected. 3 days after implementation, an automated fraud system in one of Sundar's divisions flagged a microfinance platform in rural Africa. Before the change, the system would have frozen the platform immediately. Instead, a human reviewer called the local partner discovered that the unusual activity was actually a surge in small loans after a storm damaged homes and cleared the account. In Shantanu's company, the urgent fund was used to replace servers for a free medical database that went down after an electrical fire. The hospital using it to coordinate remote patient care never missed a day. None of these moments made headlines. None were posted on social media. And that was the point. Weeks later, they met again, this time at a small cafe near the water. No press, no handlers, just the two of them, coffee cups between them, watching the tide move in and out. "Do you think it'll stick?" Shantanu asked. "It will if we keep choosing it," Sundar said. "Kindness doesn't run on autopilot." They sat for a long while without speaking, letting the quiet do its work. In the distance, a group of teenagers in hoodies were gathered around a laptop, laughing and pointing at something on the screen. Neither man knew what they were building or studying, but they both knew, in the smallest, most certain way, that whatever it was, the world was better for it being possible. Before they left, Sundar's phone buzzed. It was a message from the principal in Southeast Asia. She sent a picture of her students holding up certificates from their completed exams. The caption read simply, "We passed." Shantanu read it over his shoulder, and they both smiled. There would be other storms, other tests, and other attempts to twist the truth. But in that moment, under the gray sky and the steady sound of water against the pier, they both understood something important. Trust wasn't built in grand gestures or in a single day of rain. It was built in the quiet, repeated act of showing up when it mattered, no matter who was watching. They stood, shook hands, and walked separate ways down the pier, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of coffee and the knowledge that in a world of speed and suspicion, they had chosen, again and again, to lead with something slower, harder, and stronger: kindness.